Good evening once again. My name is Mark Rothstein, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to the annual Celebration of Privacy and Brandeis Health Privacy Awards. This is a wonderful evening where we celebrate our shared commitment to health privacy and recognition of two of the outstanding champions in our field. In the past year, once again, it was my privilege to serve as chair of the selection committee for the Brandeis Privacy Awards. I want to recognize the other members of the selection committee: Adrian Gropper, Deborah Hurley, Denny Jagger, who couldn't be with us tonight, and Deborah Peel, who some of you may know. In the past, I have made some remarks about Justice Brandeis before the awards, but this year we have someone who is uniquely qualified to do that, and I will introduce him in a few minutes. Nevertheless, I thought you might be interested to learn that this is not the only Brandeis Award that's given each year. In 1997, the University of Louisville School of Law was renamed the Brandeis School of Law in recognition of Justice Brandeis, who was born in Louisville in 1856, contributed money and his papers to the School of Law, and whose remains are buried under the front portico of the law school. But well before that, in 1982, the law school established the Louis D. Brandeis Medal, which is awarded to distinguished individuals whose lives reflect the values of Justice Brandeis. Among the past recipients of the award are Supreme Court Justices Harry Blackmun, Stephen Breyer, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Sandra Day O'Connor, and John Paul Stevens, Senators Howard Baker and Chris Dodd, Congressman John Lewis, and Brandeis biographer Mel Urofsky. The 2015 recipient of the Brandeis Medal was longtime Harvard law professor Arthur R. Miller. Professor Miller is known to all lawyers for his writings on civil procedure, including his writings on the famous case of Erie Railroad versus Tompkins. Sorry to bring those sorts of things up. Which was one of Justice Brandeis' most famous opinions. Professor Miller also wrote a book called The Assault on Privacy: Computers, Databanks, and Dossiers, which was mentioned this morning by Professor Horibe. In that book, Professor Miller addressed the threat to privacy of new technologies associated with the computer age, and incredibly, the book was published in 1971. I had the occasion to actually reread that book a few months ago before the presentation because I knew I was going to spend a lot of time with Professor Miller. It's amazing how so many of the things that he predicted have come about. Professor Miller also was one of the drafters of the Privacy Act of 1974, which was also mentioned earlier. I am authorized officially and pleased to announce that the 2016 recipient of the Brandeis Medal will be Justice Elena Kagan. This is an especially significant year for the award, that is 2016, because it marks the 100th anniversary of Justice Brandeis' appointment to the Supreme Court by President Woodrow Wilson. Justice Kagan is also a notable selection because she occupies the Brandeis seat on the Supreme Court. When Justice Brandeis retired in 1939, his replacement was Justice William O. Douglas, who served from 1939 to 1975. When Douglas retired in 1975, he was replaced by Justice John Paul Stevens, who served from 1975 to 2010, and his replacement is Justice Kagan. The occupants of the Brandeis seat not only have been influential justices on the Supreme Court, but they are among the longest serving members in the history of the court. And so now it's my pleasure to introduce to you the next speaker, who is a Washington lawyer, an expert on historic preservation, and oh, by the way, he just happens to be the grandson of Justice Brandeis, Frank Gilbert.
you very much for your kind comments. I'm really delighted to be here, and I have a few thoughts to share with you. People came to grandfather asking his advice quite frequently. At the end of President Hoover's administration, a senior official of the Department of Justice told grandfather that he had been offered good positions in both Washington and New York City. Grandfather's advice was, which he regularly gave, was go back to your home community and make a contribution there. The government official replied, but Mr. Justice, Fargo, North Dakota? Grandfather would be pleased that your group is calling attention to the protection of medical privacy. In his reform work as a private citizen, when he was a private citizen, grandfather formed citizen organizations that contributed significantly to the causes that he was advocating. And so this group follows that precedent. It's fair to say that many of grandfather's ideas and many of his words are useful in dealing with important issues today. The principles protecting free speech during an emergency, the individual states as laboratories of democracy, and the importance of government officials not breaking the law in order to achieve their objectives. And of course, the right to privacy. It was a long time ago, 1890, that grandfather, at the age of 34, co-authored with his law partner a Harvard Law Review article on the right to privacy. It's been widely recognized that this article opened up a new area of the law. The article said, quote, the general object in view is to protect the privacy of private life. And grandfather uses, and Mr. Warren uses an example, to publish of a modest and retiring individual that he suffers from an impediment of speech is an unwarranted infringement on his rights. The article warned that modern devices afford, and this is 1890, modern devices afford abundant opportunities for the perpetuation of such wrongs without any participation of the injured party. In 1928, many years later, grandfather dissented from a Supreme Court decision upholding a conviction that involved the use of wiretapping to obtain evidence. Grandfather continued his commitment to privacy and spoke of the right to be let alone, the most comprehensive of rights and the right most valued by civilized men. The right to be let alone, the most comprehensive of rights, and the right most valued by civilized men. He said that the makers of our Constitution sought to protect Americans in their beliefs, their thoughts, their emotions, and their sensations. Grandfather warned, and this has always intrigued me, the progress in science in furnishing government with the means of espionage is not likely to stop with wiretapping. In 1967, the Supreme Court reversed its earlier decision. As a young grandson, I heard from grandfather the details of some of his battles. He told me how important it was to gather all the facts in the situation and then to make use of these facts. Related to that is the comment he made to my mother. Susan, if you will start with the idea that this is a hard world, it will be much simpler. Grandfather would not have been surprised, but he would have been troubled by the modern proliferation of techniques and services that enable both government and private individuals and private companies to unjustifiably invade the medical privacy of individuals. Our family sends our best wishes as you continue your important work. Thank you.
Hi. I have to say, this is actually, it's a great personal honor for me to be able to introduce Sandy Pentland here. To those of us who see the world as engineers, Sandy Pentland's contributions stand out amongst privacy leaders. Privacy, a deeply human and social construct, is challenged by technology because technology seems to move so much faster than our social and political culture. It's easy to criticize technology, but engineers, by definition, have to approach from a constructive perspective. As an imaging and healthcare professional, as well as a Media Lab groupie, I've been aware of Sandy's work for decades, only recently focusing directly from a privacy perspective. If you're using a computer, images have always been big data. Sandy's work traces a spectacular path from image understanding in natural human terms to social structures designed to work with large and connected data sets, and then to the very heart of people as data. Some 30 years ago, I still remember Sandy's work on image understanding as a demonstration of hyperzoom, reminiscent of the famous scene in Blade Runner, dating myself maybe too, where the hero identifies a snake costume in an image by its texture. Not long after this, Sandy pioneered the field of facial recognition in large data sets, and the link to privacy emerges. As large data sets become the product of connectivity rather than imaging, Sandy's pioneering work continues into the application of social media. For me, the highlight is the Red Balloons Challenge, where hundreds of teams compete to be the first to locate 10 red balloons raised in various places across America. Sandy's team won, based on a strategy that more effectively harnessed the social internet, demonstrating once again an understanding of the connection between people and data. Which brings us to today. Image understanding and ubiquitous connectivity are a fact of life. The scope of big data, as Snowden has shown, includes universal surveillance, unlimited storage, and secret processing. The NSA budget is classified, but we know that data brokers are a $170 billion a year business. That's almost secret, almost as secret. The data brokers seem to have the better security, however. For the past 8 years, Sandy has championed the link between technology and privacy under the flag of the New Deal on Data, which we heard about earlier today. He's been clear that privacy and data ownership come first and has sponsored many projects aimed at engineering this person-centered perspective. This is consistent with patient privacy rights position, and we are still eager for other institutions to join us. But it doesn't stop with the New Deal on Data, because that's philosophy, not technology. About 2 years ago, I realized that Sandy's students were, like us, engineering the tools to make personal control of personal data possible at a scale as large as healthcare. Media Lab academic work on digital rights objects shows us a path to restoring the patient's right of consent that was stripped out of HIPAA in 2002. Sandy and his team at the Media Lab proceeded to sponsor 2 seminal conferences on health data privacy that have resulted in the formation of the Health Relationship Trust Project, or HEART, under the auspices of the OpenID Foundation. HEART is now the prime example of engineering for giving people control of our data in healthcare and beyond. In the preface of his 2014 book, Social Physics, Sandy writes, quote, "Most people think about using a framework centered on the individual and the eventual steady-state outcome, whereas I," meaning Sandy himself, "think in terms of social physics, growth within networks." Does this network centricity cast doubt on my own work on patient-centered health information infrastructure? How does it apply to healthcare and to the oft-stated goal of a learning healthcare system? The principal theme of Sandy's book, Idea Flow, sounds very close to a learning healthcare system. Will ideas flow amongst patients more effectively than they will flow amongst licensed professionals? Will siloed and self-absorbed institutions be able to incorporate wearables and big data? The growing controversy around electronic health records and meaningful use shows us that healthcare has yet to make peace with information technology. By giving this award to Sandy, we're calling attention to a call for a new deal on data and doing our best to make sure it illuminates our path to a learning healthcare system. Please.
I'm certainly honored. This is sort of a surprise to me because, while I'm passionate about it, there's no field of privacy. So to have prizes is cool, and you should be commended on doing this because it'll attract more people to it. As you just mentioned, I got involved in this because I was one of the first guys to begin looking at big data at MIT and what that meant for society. And one of the first things that was notable was that there were some great public goods, but there were also great threats. And that nobody was talking about it in a sort of an engineering way where this is a problem to be solved, not something to complain about. And, complaining is good, draws attention, but, I'm at an engineering school. We got to do that stuff. And so I put together a position paper that was titled The New Deal on Data, which harkens back to the famous 1930s New Deal. And the idea there was to put people central in this ecosystem of data so that you would have rights to ownership and control of your data. So if there was data about you, you should know about it. You should be in charge of helping to dispose of it, where it goes. You should be able to retract it. And you should be able to get value from it because as the center of the ecosystem, you're the one that can gate it. And I was fortunate to be able to start a group at Davos with the World Economic Forum that included some of the chief regulators in the world from the Federal Trade Commission, the Justice Commissioner of the EU, people from the Central Committee in China, places like that, along with chairman of Vodafone, chief technical officer of Microsoft, a whole variety of people to discuss this with my idea about the New Deal being the fire starter. And it was an interesting thing. It lasted several years. But in the end, we all saw that there was an opportunity. And the opportunity was that the politically viable solution, the solution that really ended up in something that was positive for society, was something where individuals were far more in charge of data about them than is true today. A way to think about that is that, it's spent, this is the year, I think, we're the 8th century since the Magna Carta. And the Magna Carta is about privacy too, sort of personal independence and being able to control your body and your goods. And now we have this digital identity that follows us around, all the things we do in cyberspace. And today we're before 1215, where we don't own our digital identity at all. Government owns it, companies own it. And we need to have the similar sort of fight, hopefully not 8 centuries, to be able to get to a place that's like the sort of control we have over our physical selves and our property. So we need to control our digital identities. And so that's what I've done, and it turns out that from a technical point of view, this is sort of interesting, but not hugely challenged. So we've actually built software and tested it out in real world and inspired other people to do similar sorts of things. The most interesting thing now that you may not know of is DARPA, the Defense Research Projects Agency, just started a Brandeis project. And it's built on the New Deal on Data. It uses the notion of personal data stores. And so they're putting in $60 million to build an open source system that they hope will be a template for dealing with data. I regard that as a major step forward. So I'm not going to talk very much. I have to get on an airplane. But what I'm doing on airplanes, I'm going to London, where we're starting something called the Data Transparency Lab. And this is with a large gift from Telefonica. Because as it turns out, we don't know where our data goes. It gets sold and remixed. And so what we're going to do is we're going to fund tools and research to be able to figure out who has our data, why, so that we can have an informed discussion about what should be done with that. So, thank you. And apologies for rushing out the door.
Well, it's my honor on behalf of Patient Privacy Rights and the Brandeis family to be able to give you this Louis D. Brandeis Privacy Award.
Great.
for your work, putting people at the center of control of their data. And I just have to tell you, as a physician for 41 years, the number one ethic is put the patient first.
Yay.
And so, thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Take a picture of it?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh, on either side.
Oh, one of
All
us.
right, on either side.
Okay. Okay, thank you all.
Thank you, Cindy. Thank you so much.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Deborah Hurley, and I have the privilege and pleasure tonight to introduce Dr. Masao Horibe to you, who is the second recipient of a 2015 Louis de Brandeis Award. Dr. Horibe is the current chairman of the Specific Personal Information Protection Commission of the Government of Japan. Here is one of their publications, and this morning he gave quite a detailed discussion about the activities of that group. He is also a professor emeritus of Hitotsubashi University in Japan. Dr. Horibe is recognized as one of the most senior and most preeminent global experts on privacy and data protection in Japan, in Asia, and around the world. Anyone who works in international protection of personal data and privacy either knows or knows of Dr. Masao Horibe. And since this is largely an American audience, where he may not be quite as well known, I will take a few minutes this evening to introduce him to you. I'm not, though, going to tell you Dr. Horibe's biography, because it's very substantial and very impressive. I don't have time to do that this evening. But it appears in the summit booklet that you received, and I commend it to you. I commend it to you to read it. I urge you to take the time to read it. It's a wonderful guide for anyone as they try and fashion their own life of meaning. So Horibe came of age as part of the post-war generation after the Second World War, a generation who knew the excesses of and the price of devastating war and destruction. And also the generation which created, as a phoenix rising out of the ashes of all of that, the modern system of human rights, including the human right of privacy. This generation also was in its prime during the growth of computerization. So the incredible benefits of the growth of information and communications technologies, but also the concerns that were raised initially with regard to the one big mainframe. That was the idea early on. And then obviously with the proliferation of computing and information with the many little brothers and their ubiquity and the concerns for the preservation of human dignity. So that critical, very delicate balance of power between the individual and the state, which requires eternal vigilance, Dr. Horibe and those of his generation were highly aware of that and sought to preserve that very carefully. So there is a law that protects personal data and privacy at the international level. There are 2 international accords with regard to data protection and privacy. There are rules nationally. There are in over 100 countries, there are laws to protect personal data and privacy. And there are regional laws as well, or regional accords, such as in the European Union and also in other regions of the world. And Dr. Horibe's contributions are evident in all of those things. Those over 100 laws, those international accords, those regional agreements, his contributions appear as threads running through all of that. I won't talk about the national level in Japan because he did it far more admirably than I could possibly do this morning, give a very thorough explanation of the evolution of it in Japan. But I will tell you, which he didn't, that in Japan he's called Dr. Privacy. That's his nickname. Also, which some of you may not know, there's a very vibrant, as I mentioned, over 100 countries throughout the world have data protection laws, and so almost all of Latin America, much of Europe, obviously, a number of states in Africa, and throughout the Asia-Pacific region. There are at least 24 or more countries and territories in the Asia-Pacific region that have data protection laws. And there's actually something called the Asia-Pacific Privacy Forum, which meets twice a year. And in fact, they're meeting this month in this June, and that will be their 43rd meeting. So they meet quite a lot. Japan, again, you may not know this, and Dr. Horibe didn't highlight this morning, I think out of modesty, but Japan was one of the first countries in the world, and certainly in the Asia-Pacific region, to have data protection and privacy legislation. So it set the pace along with the United States, France and Germany, the Netherlands, some of the early countries that adopted data protection legislation and started to frame out the concepts and thinking about what that meant. So there are, throughout the world now, these many countries that have it. So as well known as he is in Japan, being called Dr. Privacy, he is almost equally known throughout the international community and throughout the world. He's just as present at every turn. If you look at the development of privacy over the last half century, you will see Dr. Horibe's image in there. He has been a fixture. There's something called the International Commissioners Conference, International Data Protection Commissioners Conference, which happens annually. And in fact, this year is the 37th annual meeting, so it's been going on at international level that long. He's a fixture at that conference and has been. In addition, one of the two international accords I mentioned are what are called the OECD guidelines on privacy and data protection, which were adopted by the OECD member nations and over 150 companies, many people don't know this, in 1980. And so the OECD has had a charge to look after data protection and privacy for many years. Dr. Horibe has led the Japanese delegation and chaired committees at the OECD again for many years. And that's actually how I first met him in 1988. When I went to work at the OECD, he was part of the Japanese delegation and led them throughout that time. In addition to all of what I've just described to you, which may seem a bit abstract to people and also reflecting into law and ethics and these kinds of things, he's also had a very human mission as well, in addition to affecting humanity and individual humans through these efforts. And he's been a mentor to many upcoming generations, and I've seen this myself. I haven't seen all of it, but I've seen it many times on his travels, whether to the Commissioners' Conference or where I would see him, or at the OECD, where I would usually see him. He has always made an effort to bring along one or two younger people, who are researchers or law professors or government officials in the area, and including significantly women, so thank you for that, and bringing along young people to bring them up in this field. And I'll just mention one of them tonight. One of his more recent proteges is whom I'm sure you'll be hearing more of in the privacy world, which is why I'm mentioning him. It's Mr. Miyashita, who is another very smart fellow whom I've had the pleasure to come to know, and he's a law professor in Japan. And I first met him through Dr. Horibe. He then subsequently spent a year as a fellow at Harvard Law School, so since I live in that area and fellow at Harvard, then I had a chance to interact with him quite a bit. And we've continued to be in contact, and I most recently saw him at the Asia Pacific Forum meeting last December. I gave a speech there at the Asia Pacific Forum meeting, and I noted that the 21st century will be the Asia Pacific century. And during the 20th century, Dr. Horibe has laid the groundwork, not only in Japan, not only in the Asia Pacific region, but around the world for that Asia Pacific century. And in the face of developments in information and communication technology and other advanced technologies, and this burgeoning dynamic set of technologies that we now live in, which will bring and do bring and will bring many new benefits, but many significant threats. Dr. Horibe has tirelessly worked within that to preserve to individuals their freedom, their autonomy, and their dignity. So for 50 years, over 50 years, Dr. Horibe has provided inspirational, persistent, multinational, international, multi-generational leadership, and in recognition of that, we gather tonight. So please join me in congratulating Masao Horibe as he receives the 2015 Louis D. Brandeis Award.
Speak first, I guess, speak first. Is this live now? Oh, okay.
Okay. Well, Deborah, thank you very much for your gracious introduction. It is a great honor to receive the Louis D. Brandeis Privacy Award this year, and wish to express my warmest appreciation of your kind consideration. In particular, I would like to express my deep gratitude to two Deborahs. One is Dr. Deborah Pugh, founder and chair, and the other is Ms. Deborah Harley. Dr. Pugh has exchanged email with me tirelessly, both day and night. I'm not here tonight thanks to her warm invitation. I have learned very much about patient privacy and patient privacy rights from her articles. Regarding to other Deborah, Ms. Deborah Harley, I remember meeting her in her office at the OECD in Paris in 1990, a quarter of a century ago. At that time, the OECD was preparing to launch its project of making security guidelines, and she played an integral role in a group of experts on security chaired by the Australian justice, famous justice, the Right Honourable Michael Kirby, and she played an integral role in drafting the 1992 OECD security guidelines. If you will allow me to express my pleasure, today is one of the happiest and proudest days in my long life of almost 80 years. There is no Nobel Prize in the field of legal science, but the Louis D. Brandeis Privacy Award is the equivalent of that to me. I would like to take this opportunity to tell you about my personal connection with my privacy and personal data protection in Japan a little bit. I have been researching privacy for over half a century, beginning in 1960 with Samuel Warren and Louis D. Brandeis' article, The Right to Privacy, which was published in Harvard Law Review in 1980, as you know. In those days, there were no photocopying machines, so I copied the article word for word in my notebook by hand. That was hard work for me, especially in my second language, but helped me better understand Brandeis' theory of the right to privacy. It could be said that this experience came part of my flesh and blood. Anyway, I showed the copy of the Harvard Law Review this morning. Well, this article is cited very often, and perpetual flame of the right to privacy has been mentioned in many books and articles in the world. One example is by William Prosser, Privacy in California Law Review. It said, it has come to be regarded as the outstanding example of the influence of legal periodicals upon the American law. I would like to rewrite this sentence as follows, and not only in the American law, but also the Japanese law and all other laws in the world. In Japan today, the right of privacy is legally protected by courts of justice and legislative measures. Historically, term privacy, it's a foreign language for us, seems to have first appeared in Japanese literature in the 1920s and 1930s, but was not recognized to any great extent in the academic world until the late 1950s. Legal scholars, including me, who have researched the development of the right to privacy in Anglo-American and continental law, have attempted to translate it into Japanese, but no translation has yet prevailed. In other words, we have been unable to invent a new Japanese word readily acceptable to the public. However, the term privacy, written in katakana, a phonetic alphabet used to write foreign words in Japanese, has become a Japanese word with which almost all Japanese people are familiar today. I'd like to skip to the last part. I'd like to touch upon the recent developments in Japan. On March 10th, 2015, the bills to amend the Personal Information Protection Act of 2003, in which I have been involved in drafting, and the Number Use Act of 2013, partly I have been involved in drafting this act too, were approved by Cabinet and submitted to the Diet. We usually use the Diet, not Congress. After the bills pass the Diet in the current session, the specific Personal Information Protection Commission, which I have been chairing, which was set up on January 1st, 2014. So my commission is just 1 year and 5 months old, very new. It was established by the Number Use Act of 2013. This commission will be reorganized for the purpose of the establishment of the Personal Information Protection Commission on January 1st, 2016, next January. The bills were passed by the House of Representatives, the lower house, on May 21st and sent to the House of Council, the upper house, the same day. The plenary session of the upper house began to deliberate on the bills on May 22nd, and its cabinet committee discussed them toward the end of last month, and also yesterday. I understand the bill will be discussed tomorrow and hopefully adopted by the cabinet committee. And then next day, Friday, June the 5th, the plenary session of the upper house will adopt these bills. If the bills are passed in this current session, and as I told you, my specific personal information, the specific will be deleted, and just Personal Information Protection Commission with general jurisdiction over personal protection and privacy in the public sector. How to deal with the protection of privacy and personal data in the public sector is now going under discussion. Anyway, I will be in charge of the data protection and privacy in Japan next January. So, and I have a very 2015 experiences in drafting and also administrating the acts on personal data protection. So based on these experiences and at 2015 awardee of Louis Day Brandeis Privacy Award, I will continue to make great efforts to achieve our mission of striking a proper balance between utilizing personal data, especially big data, and protecting privacy and personal information, including patient privacy. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you, guys. Someone could...
Okay, yeah.
Okay, Chip, you're going to take a picture, and then Patsy will too. Okay. Well, okay. Well,
One more. Thank you.
yes. Well, this is such a great honor and a sign of our great respect for your lifetime of work to protect privacy in the tradition of Louis D. Brandeis. So congratulations.
Thank you very much.
And we're so pleased that you came. You should know that he's only here for 48 hours. He came for this because his major piece of legislation is going to be enacted on Friday, and he will triumph as, again, Dr. Privacy in Japan with this new appointment. Thank you so much for coming at this time.
Thank you.
So, well, there's still more wine. And still more people to talk to, so please enjoy yourselves. And thank you so much for coming and sharing this very special time with us. We have such amazing heroes, and it's so wonderful to hear their stories. Sandy, safe travels. Professor Horibe, the same to you tomorrow. And so, anyway, and thank you, Frank, for representing the family. You make this event very, very special for us. So, thank you all, and please keep visiting, and we will see you again next year. Thank you. Tomorrow. Oh, 9 o'clock. We're not done. We're not done. Barry, I'm watching all of you. We're not done. 9 o'clock tomorrow.